Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the solo mode for Canvas from designers Jeff Chin and Andrew Nerger, and coming from publisher Road to Infamy. In Canvas you are trying to create 3 beautiful masterpieces, and doing so by fulfilling scoring condition cards. So let's head over to the table. I'll give you a brief overview on how the solo games are played. There are 2 of them, and then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we see the solo setup for Canvas, and in Canvas you can play the solo game in one of 2 ways. There's actually 2 solo variants in the rulebook. You've got Painting with Vincent and then the solo puzzle. They both play remarkably similarly, and the game itself is a very simple game mechanically, so I'll just talk briefly about both of them. Essentially what you're trying to do in Canvas, both in the solo game and in the multiplayer game, is you are trying to complete 3 paintings. You start the game with 3 background cards and a sleeve, and what you're going to be doing is taking these art cards, stacking them, and it doesn't help you much to see it by itself, but if you put it on that background you can see that it starts to create a painting, and it also has symbols at the bottom. What you're trying to do is complete 3 paintings. That's going to trigger the end game, and you're going to be doing so with these scoring conditions in mind. And right now I've got the 4 scoring cards that they recommend for a first player game, but there's all kinds of different cards. So right now we've got composition, which means you're trying to get 1 of every color represented, and you've got repetition, where every pair of triangle symbols will get you a certain number of points by the end of the game, etc., etc. Now, the other thing I want to really quickly point out is that you can see them stuck on those little easels. These little wooden easels came with the deluxe edition of the Kickstarter game. They're absolutely unnecessary, and your copy may or may not have them. Also, the tokens that we see here, these award ribbons and the inspiration tokens, these are wooden. In the standard edition of the game they're cardboard, but functionally they make no difference at all. They're completely unnecessary, although they are lovely components to have. The scoring cards, as I mentioned, there's all kinds of different ones here, and they have a nice explanation on the back, which I really appreciate, to explain how they work. So right now I'm just showing you the starting recommended setup. So essentially on your turn you're going to be doing one of 2 things. Let me show you the first solo playing against Vincent situation. So you would go first. On your turn you can only do one of 2 things. You can either get an art card or you can complete a painting. Well, you need 3 cards to complete a painting, so that's not happening for at least my first 3 turns. I'm going to be choosing one of these art cards. So maybe I'd be looking at a card that has triangles on it so I can go for the repetition, or exactly 1 of this bonus. But if I wanted to get a card over here, I would have to spend inspiration on every card before it. That's what these tokens are, inspiration. The first card over here, furthest from the art deck, is free. I'll go ahead and take that one because it does have a triangle symbol on it. So I'll start building up towards making a painting. These would all slide down. I didn't put any inspiration tokens on any cards, and then the next card is going to come out of the deck. All right, now on Vincent's turn, what you do is you take his 4 starting inspiration tokens that he began with. You just take them and you throw them up in the air. None of them came up face up. Let's say that it actually instead had done this. If none of them had come up face up, Vincent would just take the leftmost card. But let's assume it did this. For everyone that's face up to a maximum of 4, you'd place it on the card, leftmost card, and then take the next card, all right, which is this one. So this card gets removed, these slide down, and now you can see that there is an inspiration token there sitting for me if I want to take this first card. And there's a couple of triangles there, and actually 2 colors I don't have. So let's say that I took that, and now I've got these 2 cards, the Divine Game so far, which is looking good for me because I've got 3 triangles, and all but green. So if somewhere out here a green triangle came up like that one, that might be really nice for me. All right, these slide down, and we keep going. Vincent throwing his tokens, picking cards, etc. Moving down, and I'm taking my cards let's say that I had eventually on this turn, let's say I spent inspiration to take this card, and then on a future turn, my next turn, perhaps, I went ahead and made a painting. I take all three of these, which is now called Divine Escape. And I know that at the end of the round, I'm going to be getting some points because I've got 2 sets of triangles. I've got all 5 colors. I don't have the variety. Anyway, you're just trying to score these bonuses. The game end is going to trigger when you have completed your 3 paintings, and you're going to have a score matrix. So that is solo variant 1 playing against Vincent. The solo puzzle is very similar. In this one, you're going to have a set of 4 inspiration tokens in the supply. Okay, so this area here is the supply, and you're going to be having your starting 4, okay? And when you spend your inspiration tokens, you don't place them on the cards themselves in this variant, you're placing them into the supply, and the cards that you skip get discarded from the game. So let's say I wanted, there's no card there, but let's say I wanted this card, the Sanctuary. Instead of putting them on the cards, I'd put them in the supply. I would take the Sanctuary, and these cards would be removed from the game. These would come all the way down and refilled, and you're going to just play that way until you finish with your 3 paintings. Also, when you do take the leftmost card, you would take a inspiration token from the supply, and when you complete a painting, you would take a inspiration token from the supply, if there are any. In either variant, you're going to check your score versus this matrix here to see how well you did, whether you just get a participation award, you're an emerging artist, or you are best in show. That, in a nutshell, is how you play Canvas solo. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the 2 solo variants work in Canvas. Not a huge difference between those 2 variants, but enough to talk a little bit about both. The first thing I want to do is hit those solo benchmarks. These are things that I often look at when I'm determining whether to get a game off the shelf or not. The first thing I like to talk about is the win-loss condition. Is this a beat your opponent variant? Is it a high score variant? And in the case of Canvas, there are 2 variants. They both are a high score variant. In one, you are kind of technically playing against a rival, Vincent, but it really is not a traditional beat your opponent type of a solo game. It's still a high score variant. And for both of them, I don't have a problem with that. This is a puzzle game at heart. And for puzzle games, I tend to think that high score variants work just fine. I feel like it is still a satisfying experience in this game to be going for a high score. I don't necessarily feel like I have to have a rival who's also completing paintings, who I'm trying to compare my score to theirs, and the highest score wins. This type of a game, I don't know that that would work as well, so I'm happy with the win-loss conditions in Canvas. Setup and teardown is just fine. I mean, it's really very little to set up and tear down. You've got the cards, the art cards are already kept in a nice little tuck box. And so you're basically unrolling the little map, putting out the tokens, shuffling up some cards, and you're good to go. It's just a couple of minutes to set the game up. Doesn't take long to tear it down, which is good because it's a very short game. In most cases, when I played it solo, I played multiple games back to back. And so it's nice that the setup and teardown is short. The rules are generally fine. There were a couple of times where there were things that were left out that I wish they had been a little bit more explicit about and that I was kind of taking a guess. Like, for example, it didn't say specifically in the solo rules that you're going to start with your inspiration tokens. It does say that your opponent, Vincent, will. I assumed that I would as well. So little things like that that I felt like maybe could have been more illuminated in the book, but for the most part, the rules are fine. They're kept at the back of the book and their own page, both variants right there on the same page, and they're very simple rules. For the most part, I felt like there were no issues there. Art and components. Well, this is probably going to be the calling card of this game. Anybody who walks by and sees this on the table is going to be stricken by how gorgeous it is. I mean, the game box itself, in a nice little novel twist, can actually be hung on the wall as a piece of art. So Canvas is certainly leaning into the aesthetic, this beauty of art. And I think it does a very good job in doing that with the components. Those semi-clear, semi-transparent art cards are beautiful. They're satisfying to put together. You can make little quibbles that maybe it's a little hard sometimes to read the name of your finished painting, but that's a real quibble because I thought it was fine. There is something that is just satisfying about manipulating these components, putting them together in those sleeves behind your or in front of your background, and just having this beautiful image with usually a clever name to go along with it as well. So the art and components are very, very, very good. I did show you in the overview the upgraded edition, the deluxe edition with the wooden bits, but the cardboard bits that it comes with are just fine. The wooden bits are not necessary. The easels are completely unnecessary in every sense, but it's fine that they're there. I don't even know that I'm going to use them. I was showing you in that overview a way that you can use them by putting the scoring cards on there. That's not even recommended in the rule book. I just saw a picture of that somewhere and thought it was kind of clever, so I went with that. All right, so for the overall solo experience, Canvas is a very simple to understand but ultimately satisfying puzzle game. It's a game that you could teach to just about anybody in minutes. You're doing one of two things. You're either taking a card or you're completing a painting. That's it. You complete 3 paintings and your game is done, and then once everyone else has done their 3 paintings, the whole game is done. Very, very simple to learn and teach, but a nice, satisfying puzzle, especially when you get into some of the scoring cards that are a little bit more complex than the ones they use as a recommended starting set of 4. This does feel like a unique entry into what is being now a new genre of card crafting. There's a whole series of games that are doing these kind of sleeves that you put cards in to craft another thing. This isn't exactly the same as those other games, or something like Mystic Vale, where you're kind of almost deck building through this card crafting system. This is not exactly that. This is kind of more of a novelty, but as such, I feel like it is a nice little twist to that formula. It didn't exactly work the same way other card crafting type games did. Those scoring cards that I mentioned earlier add a nice amount of variety to the game. Just in how they come out, just in the interaction between those, the interaction that you may have if you're playing it multiplayer is going to be different than in the solo game. But in the solo game, having those different scoring cards can keep this puzzle fresh so that you don't feel like you're doing the same thing every time. You're not just trying to do the same, I always know I'm going to be going for all 5 colors. I always know I'm going to be going for pairs of triangles. No, there's so many different scoring cards, you'll have a different experience depending on which of those come out. Both AI variants are fine. They're good. I don't know if there's enough of a difference between the 2 solo AI variants to warrant having both. I think maybe they could have just picked which one they thought worked best and went with it, but hey, why not? Give people the options. That's fine. It's not like a negative necessarily, but I didn't necessarily feel like they were distinct enough from each other. They both kind of had the same feel to them. That was just my experience on it. But overall, I think Canvas does a very, very good job of giving you a nice bang for your buck, a short playtime, very simple rule set. For all of these reasons, I'm going to be giving Canvas an 8 out of 10, a seal of approval, a strong seal of approval. I think this is a game that's going to get a lot of love once it starts getting into more players' hands. It's a good solo game, a good multiplayer game. Definitely one to check out, especially if the theme is of interest to you. All right, well, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.